Hello, lovelies. This is probably a bad idea. Alice Cooper is mid-cancellation for some comments on trans issues that are actually fairly nuanced. And back in the 70s, Alice was saying things like, everyone will be bisexual in the future, and he knew what the definition of pansexuality was, which puts him ahead of me, because to me it just still sounds like bisexual. Like a lot of rock and metal people from the 70s and 80s, he played around a lot with gender expectations in terms of things like his makeup, clothing, presentation, etc. This isn't a guy you can really characterize as being socially conservative. By all accounts, he's a super chill, super nice guy. And he's on record as saying that rock and roll should not just be apolitical, but it should be anti-political. I mean, if you want to go after a genuinely problematic rock star, Ted Nugent is right there, and he's still friends with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, so strange bedfellows. Nonetheless, Alice, in an interview on a site called Stereo Gum, he said a few things that seem to have gotten him into a bit of hot water, but I think they're actually more nuanced than people are giving him credit for, and I don't want another J.K. Rowling situation to unfurl with grim inevitability. So in this interview, and I will link it down below so you can go and read in the full context and everything for yourselves. Don't believe me, check for yourself, always. But he said, I'm understanding that there are cases of transgender, but I'm afraid it's also a fad. Which is being reported as if he said it's just a fad and that people should be denied gender-affirming care, etc., etc. Except that's not what he said, none of that. He said it's also a fad. Things can be both real and genuine, and they can also be fads. I don't think we can deny that there are a hell of a lot of people who've called themselves queer just to jump on the bandwagon. And unless queer now means entirely heterosexual manic pixie dream girl with an undercut, then I don't think they're queer. If you're old, like me, then you may remember how pretty much everyone used to claim to be bisexual in the 90s, and then lo and behold, it turned out that they weren't. Or, again, from the same period, you might remember how self-harm went kind of viral, became socially contagious. Right, and that's not to say that there aren't queer people, it's just that there's a lot of people who seem to want to hitch themselves to that wagon for one reason or another. Nor is it to say that there aren't people who are genuine about their self-harm, he said, looking at his own scars. Right? It can be both at the same time. And trans and non-binary phenomena can be both real, deserving of our compassion and our support and medical intervention where necessary and all the rest of it. And it can also be a fad. Both of these things can be true at the same time, and people are allowed to be concerned. Being concerned isn't the same thing as being hateful or intolerant, right? He also said in the interview, I think that's so confusing to a kid. It's even confusing to a teenager. You're still trying to find your identity, and yet here's this thing going on saying, yeah, but you can be anything you want. You could be a cat if you want to be. I mean, if you identify as a tree. And I'm going, come on, what are we in? A Kurt Vonnegut novel? It's so absurd that it's gone now to the point of absurdity. Now this quote is being taken as a reference to the kids shitting in litter boxes nonsense that Grandpa has been passing around as memes on Facebook. But while Alice is in his 70s, so he is a grandpa, I think he was just groping around for something to say, something that captured what he was getting at, and hence the mention of tree as well as cat. And we have had people transition into cats. We have had people transition into a different race. We have had people hurt themselves, pour bleach into their eyes to become disabled because they viewed themselves as transabled. Yeah, these are edge cases, but they exist. And the whole gender non-conforming space is an edge case. Even with the current high visibility of it all, less than half of 1% of people in the United States identify as transgender or non-binary. Youth are more likely to identify themselves as being in that space, but the number of adults identifying in that way has been extremely steady over a huge amount of time, as long as we've been keeping track of it. So while some of the difference is going to be relative acceptance and people feeling free and able to be themselves, the sheer amount of change is some reason to suspect that there is some faddishness or social contagion at work, which again isn't to deny the existence of trans people or to suggest that care and compassion and everything shouldn't come first. Just, these are the facts, and there is some small cause for concern. He also said this: the whole woke thing, nobody can answer this question. Maybe you can. Who's making the rules? Is there a building somewhere in New York where people sit down every day and say, okay, we can't say mother now, we have to say birthing person. Get that out on the wire right now. Who is this person that's making these rules? I don't get it. I'm not being old school about it, I'm being logical about it. So, okay, right. And you can't expect rock and roll rebels to conform to rules, especially when they appear to be arbitrary. And that's kind of stark, isn't it? And that's kind of meaningful. When he was speaking in the 1970s and 80s, when he was performing in the 1970s and 80s, he was rebelling against a starkly conformist and much more conservative, right-wing overculture. Now he's speaking against, however gently, and consider the reaction, he's speaking against a starkly conformist and conservative overculture masquerading as a progressive and left-wing one while being hugely repressive and puritanical. He goes on to say, well, I respect people. I respect people and who they are. I'm not going to tell a 7-year-old boy, go put a dress on because maybe you're a girl. And he's going, no, I'm not, I'm a boy. So I say let someone at least become sexually aware of who they are before they start thinking about if they're a boy or a girl. Yeah, that's respectful and reasonable, isn't it? That's tolerance. He respects people. He accepts that trans is a thing. He's more than just tolerant, he's accepting. He just has some small amount of reservations, and that really seems to be the only thing that is setting people off. I mean, okay, yeah, he invokes the bathroom thing, and that's kind of dumb, but it's not like we haven't run into problems with bad actors in similar spaces now, is it? Like I say, this worries me for the same reason that the reaction to Rowling worries me, or the way in which labelling anyone and everyone with a mildly dissenting opinion as a fascist pushed so many people to the far right. One of the original things that Rowling said that kicked off the never-ending hate fest that's been going on against her ever since was the following: dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. Yeah, that's a tolerant statement, albeit it was hooked up to a particular controversy at the time. But tolerance is all any of us can justifiably ask for our foibles and oddities, our kinks and dings and psychological tics. Whatever way we don't conform, the best we can ask for, really, is tolerance. But you'd think that Rowling, or Alice now, had eaten a live puppy raw in front of a group of preschoolers. The way that people have reacted and acted. And since then, Rowling has gotten more and more nasty and turfy. but I think that most of that is because she was attacked so viciously. Many people removed themselves from her orbit who would have been more tolerant and would have given her a path to better understanding or whatever, and many nasty people came into her orbit, willing to accept her and talk to her and so on. So it's only natural to go where you're wanted and to leave where you're unwanted, and none of us are entirely immune to having our attitudes shifted by the company that we keep, especially if it's more intimate company, friendship circles and so on. I mean, sex is real, right? And we're separating sex from gender representation or presentation now, right? Isn't that the very point? Isn't that the very tragedy at the center of trans and non-binary existence, that sex is real, that your gender identity is also real, but that they don't match? Isn't that the point of it all? And yet people can be attacked for agreeing, and it seems very strange. When you turn on people like Alice for extremely milquetoast and understandable concerns expressed in a tolerant, loving and accepting way, then you're making enemies when you should be trying to make friends. You should be trying to inform him and win him over, help him understand. Yeah, isn't that the very fucking point of activism? Then you're terrible activists. Zang.
I don't often make explicitly political games, but the Little Grey Book is one of them. It's a parable about this social media panopticon we've all made, where everyone is always watching each other for anyone who steps out of line in any way. And the Little Grey Book is about the inescapability of upsetting someone. It's a one-trick pony, but it's a good one-trick pony. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.